emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 1077.PR0719, certificate number 46962. Roady Bill and Tony the Pony.
Roady Bill and Tony the Pony.
Sounds like is this a Springsteen song? It's a Bob Dylan parody of a Springsteen song?
Pretty close.
Tweeter and the Monkey Man?
You've been on the internet a long time.
Nope.
What are the places that you go every day? What are your bookmarks?
Let me see. New York Times Spelling Bee Puzzle. My email.
Yeah. But I'm talking about on the internet.
COVID numbers. I do email in a browser. COVID numbers in King County.
Every day. You don't do Ars Technica or something like that?
Maybe Slate or Reddit.
Those things are bookmarked. You go to Reddit? What do you do on Reddit? Talk about video games?
Yeah, I use one of my many fake sock puppet accounts to tell people to buy stock in
GameStop?
Hickory Farms of Ohio. I'm trying to get Hickory Farms I'm trying to just bankrupt the hedge funds that shorted Hickory Farms.
Do you have burner accounts where you go on and argue that Ken Jennings is the greatest host of Jeopardy?
Yeah. And they all have to come from different cities. So I'll create one and then create kind of identity for him. I'll subscribe to maybe a model train subreddit, right. A different geographical one, like a Florida subreddit, create a whole persona for this person. Then think about how much that person would be into Ken Jennings.
Yeah. You're behind 7 proxies.
And then write accordingly. And then, as long as I have 30 or 40 of those, there's usually a pretty good fan section.
Right. And they're all model train enthusiasts because you're imitating real Jeopardy fans.
No, there's lots of other...
They make Raggedy Ann
There's
dolls.
lots of other crazy things they could be into. They all own iguanas.
They all own iguanas. Famously...
Or cockatoos.
The cockatoos much more likely than iguanas as far as Jeopardy fans. I don't have very many bookmarks, and it kind of plagues me because I do feel like the internet's full of stuff that I would be interested in.
Internet, take me away.
Come on, internet.
But there's also just the habit of it, well, I've got to be on the internet. How do I get something good?
Right, and I have had a really hard time. I have a friend that loves Atlas Obscura, and you would think Atlas Obscura would be right up my alley, right? It's cool places, weird places, people on there looking at weird places. And what I've discovered is I don't care about weird places that other people have seen. I don't really want to look at.
You want to be the first person to see. In fact, it makes me mad when Atlas Obscura already has a place because that means.
Right.
500,000 people have already seen it.
Who cares now? There are those websites where they're exploring abandoned buildings. And I think that's cool to look at once, but then I want to explore abandoned buildings. I don't care about these guys. So I don't have that many bookmarks. And I often feel dumb because I feel like the internet, I'm squandering it.
It should be a wonderland.
Yeah, and particularly, when I was on social media, I felt stupid because I was wasting all my time on social media instead of, on the Library of Congress website, looking at Thomas Jefferson's, corn receipts. But now that I have all the extra time, I don't care. And there are these great websites. Like I have a bookmark for folkstreams.net, which is full of documentaries about American folk people. There's a documentary from 1973 that's only 6 minutes long, but it's about lacrosse stick makers. And a lot of people doing, blues music, but more than anything, it's a showcase of people making short films. Well, I have it here. I never go there and look at it because it just feels like, oh, that's an investment of 6 whole minutes of my time, even though I should be doing that every day.
Video really does seem to, it's a big barrier to entry on the internet. You want to just see something now, and then you click on it and you're like, wait, it's going to take 26 seconds for this guy to fall off a skateboard.
Yeah. I remember when it wasn't that long ago that we were like, video on the internet. And then it was revealed that nobody wants to watch video.
Also, there's a time for nearly all of human history where 26 seconds would be very short commitment for an audience looking at art. And now we're like, 26 seconds? But I want content now.
Right. I mean, you spend at least 40 seconds reading the title page of any book.
Exactly.
Or the publishing data. Like, when was this book made? What edition is this?
Does this publisher have offices in, let me see, London, Buenos Aires, Johannesburg, Auckland? No, I usually skip that part.
But 26 seconds, do you really? It seems like you don't.
You know what I like is sometimes, do books still have this where they have like the Library of Congress indexing, and it'll be like, if you're reading a novel, it might be something like the Library of Congress categories might be like novels, epistolary,
right?
Cairo, novels about, 18th century food. It'll have all these different ways of slicing the book.
We have never talked about this before, but I am guessing you have a favorite card catalog. What's your favorite card catalog, Ken Jennings?
I miss all card catalogs, actually. I regret not buying. When libraries first started getting rid of them, you could buy card catalogs so cheap. Yeah. And people were like, oh, these can be fun hipster furniture. And now there's no more card catalogs and millions of hipsters that wish they owned one.
Yeah.
And you can't, you'd have to give your firstborn child for a card catalog.
It's like apothecary cabinets. Like everybody, I don't know what people are keeping in them, buttons or something, but.
Probably library index cards.
Yeah, maybe. One of the few sites that I bookmarked a long time ago and that I actually go to all the time. And I'm about to do an uncompensated for advertisement for a website.
Maybe they'll send you free stuff.
They undoubtedly will not, because what they do is feature old cars. And when I discovered this site a long time ago, it was curated clearly by some nerds who went around looking at the classified ads of the just local yokels, the Craigslist ads for people selling cars. And they cherry-picked the ones that were cool. And, there's a whole universe of American people that love cool cars. And the difference between an uncool car and a cool car is often the difference between pretty, sometimes esoteric specifications, right? There's the Camaro, and then there's the Camaro RS, and there's the Camaro SS, and then there's the Camaro SS with the 454.
I see.
Like each one.
Sure, this is a Camaro, but it's not the cool, rare one.
Exactly. And this one is the one that had they got the extra option of the special tachometer. And those are the little things that make people, that make certain cars way more expensive than other cars and way more desirable. And then, that's compounded by the desire to have cars with low mileage or no rust, or there's a whole subset of car collectors that want cars with celebrity, like history. I saw the other day that the Mercedes-Benz grosser sedan owned by, originally purchased by Roy Orbison, is for sale right now, and the Roy Orbison Provenance increases its value considerably.
It's true. Like I've seen so many cars that Roy Orbison hasn't been in, and I would not pay an extra penny for a car that Roy Orbison hasn't been in.
That's right. And Steve McQueen is kind of the most famous of those. Steve McQueen was a real car buff and a car racer.
Not to me. If I see a Steve McQueen car, I'm like, well, did he ever go anywhere with Roy Orbison?
Yeah, don't care.
Hey, Steve, let's go to the store.
Don't love it, don't care. Steve McQueen and Paul Newman.
Yeah.
These guys had a lot of cars, and they were cool cars.
Do you think someday it'll be like Jay Leno used to own?
Absolutely, it will be Jay Leno, although he has one of every car. But and so these cars really attract a premium. You just some commonplace Mustang, but if it was owned by Steve McQueen, it's triple the price.
So, and just so I understand, these people are just scraping these pictures from online listings?
Not just pictures,
or do
but
they go and take a picture of the actual car?
They bring the entire ad there, and it was a way to provide for car collectors. Because how hard would that be if you're like, I only collect Ford Tauruses. How are you personally going to go, especially since you're almost certainly a 69-year-old man, how are you going to go scour the Craigslist ads of every town? Because it's not just that those things are for sale in Los Angeles. You've got things in Paducah, Kentucky, somebody who had a pristine, one of these like Super Bees, and they're selling it to their local community. That it hasn't occurred to them to sell it online.
You'd have to have a network of operatives crisscrossing this country, taking pictures of Ford Tauri.
And there are a lot of car collectors that aren't actually multimillionaires. I remember I was on tour when I was in Harvey Danger. We were on a bus tour across the United States, and we used to stop in little towns and go to guitar stores because that was always a thing that you could do in the United States if you were out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, if you were in Nashville or San Francisco and you went into a guitar store, you knew that the guy behind the counter knew what he had, and you could negotiate with him. But, if he had a guitar that he understood was a nice guitar, you weren't going to chisel him down too much.
Yeah.
But if you were way out in the mountains somewhere,
sure.
You go in. There used to be a guitar store outside of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, that you could go in there and get guitars for pennies on the dollar compared to what they sold for in Seattle.
Just because they didn't know?
No, he knew. It was just that his local market. He's not selling to a global market. He's selling to the people that are buying guitars outside of Coeur d'Alene,
I
Idaho.
assume the internet got rid of all those inefficiencies.
Well, and that's the thing. I went into this guitar store up in hillbilly America, and the guy behind the counter was absolute like West Virginia guy who had been living there his whole life, and it was a town of 250 people. And there was some super cool guitar on the wall. I forget exactly what it was. But I said, hey, look at that fella, how much for the, and you always play dumb. So you're like, how much for the red guitar? And he said, well, on the internet, those are going for $2,200, and I was hoping to get it for $300. And I was like, on the internet? This is in the year 2000, I was like, how the hell did you get on the internet? He's like, oh, yeah, I'm on all of them.
They sent him one of those AOL tryout discs.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the beginning of the end for ever finding a cool guitar again.
For victimizing poor rural Americans.
That's right.
I'm so sorry,
in
John.
the long tradition of doing that, because I had a friend in the late 80s, early 90s he had an old, like a Galaxy 500, and he would go on these month-long trips to Montana where he would drive to a little town and he would go to the charity store, and then he would kind of talk to the people and figure out who the old farmers were. And what he was looking for was really old Levi's, farmers' Levi's. And he would find these jeans and bring them back to Seattle and sell them for $40,000 to these people, Japanese collectors of vintage denim, these buckle-back Levi's. And he kept a couple of them under his bed, in...
A couple of the Japanese collectors?
A couple of Japanese collectors. No, he kept them in a freezer. He kept a couple of jeans like hermetically sealed in a bag under his bed that he called his, what was it? It was his, like, escape money. Like, if he ever had to run, He could just throw these two.
He has six figures in denim.
That's right.
At his fingertips.
That you just throw in a bag, and he knew he could survive. I think the market for a lot of that stuff has crashed.
It does make it better when you actually do find something good because it's so rare now.
Yeah.
You're like, somebody didn't know what this was.
Yeah, they're scroungers. I was in a thrift store in Los Angeles 2 years ago, and it was just a junky thrift store. I looked across the store, and I'd been around the store once and was sort of like, there's nothing in here. I'm getting, and it was in a nice part of LA. There just wasn't anything there. It was all the way across the store, and I looked through the blue cloud that's in every Goodwill, all these people milling around, and I saw a Louis Vuitton Speedy 30, which is a little handbag that you couldn't even put a cockatiel in. You couldn't even put a little dog in this bag. But I see so many fraudulent Louis Vuitton bags. Every thrift store has 4 of them.
But you could recognize a real Louis Vuitton at 100 paces?
I looked at it, and it just was bathed in a glow. And I said, no. And I crossed the thrift store at those speed walkers. I crossed the thrift store at a speed walker pace.
Throwing old people and large families aside.
Because it was the type of thing that I was like, how is this here? And I got to it, and everything about it. I mean, I saw it from 100 yards away. Everything about it looked right. And you do see so many counterfeit purses because purses are really expensive and the right ones are really expensive. But I just knew this was right. And I picked it up, and it had been loved. It was very well cared for, but very old and had been, the leather was just, and I opened it and I looked at it and I found the little Louis Vuitton serial number and looked it up online as I'm standing there. I've got the thing on my arm because I was afraid some little old lady would come hit me with an umbrella. And it all checked out, and it was like $6. And it was not sitting behind a counter. It was just sitting on a pile of thrift store garbage, like old notebooks and umbrellas.
No one had curated it.
And I bought it, and this thing is worth quite a bit of money, but I gave it as a gift to a young woman. But the site that I spend the most time on the internet is this site, and it's called Bring a Trailer. And it was originally this group of people that were enthusiasts who did this for fun and sport. They just somehow kind of collated the used car ads, and it was full of wonderful things because they knew enough not to just put every Volkswagen Bug up there. They were obviously car enthusiasts, and they could tell the difference between a 22 window Volkswagen bus and a 1974 Volkswagen bus. And so you would see these really interesting cars. Often they were old stock car racers that had been rode hard and put away wet, but it turned out that it was, Richard Petty's first stock car, and it was in some barn.
It's sitting in a barn.
But you found a lot of those, like, oh, wow, it's a Duesenberg, but it's been in somebody's barn since 1948, and this thing is worth $300,000. And it's covered with dust and bird droppings.
And would people actually want $300,000 for it?
Oh, well, that's the thing. It was this, exploit the rural. Somebody was there selling it on Craigslist for $1,500. And the idea would be you could buy this car and then put a coat of paint or dust it off and change the oil, and you had a car you could sell to Jay Leno.
But I'm sure that by the time it made it to this site, somebody had already jumped, right?
Originally, no, right? Originally, it was a small market of people, and this is why it's called Bring a Trailer, because if I wanted a Duesenberg that was in a barn in Tennessee, just the logistics of it, and then you get a car, and like car restorers, it's sort of like buying and flipping houses. Everybody thinks they can do it. Oh, what do you have to do? But then you get the Duesenberg and you're like, you know what? To find the knob for the cigarette lighter is a $900 part because there just aren't that many. And you have to be you have to be very good at mechanics to make one of these things into something nice. But this website, as you can imagine, because I don't have any money and I don't have any mechanical aptitude and I'm never going to buy a Duesenberg. But what do I need a Louis Vuitton bag for? I don't. I couldn't care less. But this was the most exciting thing that had happened to me in 20 days, like finding this bag. And I loved just the treasure hunting. And we talk about that on the show a lot. The idea that you could find a Duesenberg in a barn.
I am convinced that evolutionarily we just crave looking for things.
Yeah.
And it explains almost everything about human art and recreation.
I loved that. I loved it. And then what the site turned into was a place where all of a sudden they'd post a car like this. And in the comment section, there'd be all these guys that were like, I restored my first Duesenberg in 1961. And you're like, who is this person? And the commenters became kind of celebrities within the culture of the website because there were these people that were like, I've owned 42 Mustangs.
It's Studebaker Bob.
And there really were those characters. Well, inevitably, this website became very popular with those types, right? And there are a lot of women and a lot of people of color because car lovers are a certain kind of thing. And we joke that they're all guys in their 60s because there are a lot of those. But then you start to realize, and we talked about this in a recent episode, the people that collected Model Ts were a generation. And when that generation died, there are no millennials driving Model Ts.
We have a Model T surplus in this country.
And this was true of 60s muscle cars, too. All the guys that wanted to drive 60s muscle cars were boomers. And
they all smoked 2 packs a day. They all got lung cancer in the same month.
That's right. And there are just fewer and fewer of them all the time. Now, those cars are still expensive because they're cool. But younger buyers, Generation X people like me, we're interested in those stupid fox-bodied Mustangs from 1986. All those terrible cars that just like, you see it every once in a while on this site. Like, a Pinto? Who wants to buy a Pinto? Well, it's only got 20,000 miles on it. It's perfect condition. Somebody wants it.
I saw one in the wild the other day and I was like, good looking car.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen a Pinto in years.
Right. I mean, I loved the AMC Eagle, which it was kind of the first little SUV, 4-wheel drive station wagon. I still love that car. And, there's nothing to recommend it, but it's now collectible. But the site gradually evolved into a place where 80% of the ads were just Porsche 911s from 2000. It was just rich guys trading cars. Yeah. And the people that ran it realized, hey, wait a minute, we should be making money off of this. And they turned it more or less into an auction site. So it wasn't anymore that they were finding cool cars in Lodi, California, but they were just waiting for rich dudes to come bring their Duesenbergs, and then other rich dudes were buying them.
No online community is good for more than 18 months or something. And then
it's just,
somebody messes it up. Influx of new people, or I'll make money off of this.
And the brilliant thing about it, and the reason that I still go there, is that there are still cool cars that come up. And a lot of them are being sold by rich people to rich people. But they are car people, and it's fascinating. Looking at the site right now, yes, there are a bunch of dumb Porsches and Audis and kind of your traditional, like, it's an MGA. There's always going to be somebody that wants to drive around in an MGA. But then, and like Lamborghinis and Cobras, but then you see like, there's kind of an interesting old Trans Am, and there's a funny little Volvo station wagon that when I was in high school you could have bought for $1,500 that apparently now is worth $20,000. I mean, who knew?
You should have got 6.
But the other day on bringatrailer.com, all of a sudden there was a covered wagon for sale. A covered wagon that was not
like a Conestoga?
Not a Conestoga, but the actual kind of covered wagon that really did make it across the plains. And it was clearly well-traveled, wooden wheeled stickers and metal plates all
From what
stuck
era?
to it.
When were people using this?
Well, this particular one had on the canvas cover stenciled what looked like kind of a billboard of the era. And this one dates from 1928. And it's funny to think that we are now well into the automotive age in 1928. And so covered wagons were now anachronistic.
This would have been your dad's or even your grandpa's kind of technology in the late 20s.
Right, but the barns of America were full.
In the same way that our barns today are full of our dads' and grandfathers' cars.
Right. They were full of old covered wagons that were just sort of like, oh, what are
I
you
never
gonna
thought
do?
about that time when it would be like, yeah, I got a covered wagon and I'm going to fix it up, I think, one of these weekends.
My mom was talking the other day about the day her father got a tractor. And everyone in her town was, like the advent of the tractor changed everything. And at first, only the richest farmers had these tractors that basically looked like, steam locomotives. But, the day her dad got a tractor and no longer had to plow with mules was, like this day she still remembers, a banner day in his life and their lives.
All we have is like the day we got a iPhone.
Yeah, your third iPhone. And, this would have been, my mom is talking about something that happened in the 1930s. So they were still, there were still wagons being used, in the United States until the mid-50s. And I think that's probably true. I mean, and I've seen horse-drawn wagons in use even in Europe in the 21st century.
Drove by a farm in the San Juans over the summer where their thing is that they do not use tractors.
But they're not Amish.
They're not. It's just we can, it's extraordinarily expensive to grow butter lettuce under those conditions, but we can now sell it for $8 a head. Right. And I saw the mule plowing a field, the mule pulled cart plowing a field before I saw the marketing stuff. So I was like, what is going on over there?
Super hipsters, right? They're just the most hipster in the world, all the way back to mules.
And then we ate someplace in town later that week, and they were like, yeah, we get all our produce from No Tractor Farms or whatever it's called.
Anyway, this wagon this wagon is up for sale on this auction site. This is
still
no, but it just ended.
I was going to go buy it as we were recording.
This is back in February,
and give it to you.
Thank you. And this is not the type of thing I would want anything. I wouldn't want it. It's not something I would use.
Too bad. I just bought you two.
Bought it. Actually, it's still for sale, and we'll get to that in a second. But this well-weathered wagon, on the side of it, it says Pioneer Covered Wagon and Famous Pony.
And famous pony?
And famous pony.
Pony's included?
Pony is included. This is the big type at the top of the.
Does it look like kind of a circusy thing, like the charlatan that picks up Dorothy at the beginning of Wizard of Oz?
It does. It's
Crowned
basically like
heads of Europe.
Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. And then underneath it says left New York, January 15th, 1928, for San Francisco, California. And then it goes on to say Mexico, Canada, Europe, and Africa.
Well, hold on. I was with you until the comma after Mexico.
Yeah. It says it covered 39,200 miles by land and 24,325 miles by sea.
See, back then, odometers were just big signs on the side of your vehicle.
Right. And you can imagine like him ticking off how many miles across the sea he's going in this covered wagon. It took 4 years and 8 months to make the tour. The only pony in the world to make the trip, Tony the Pony, pulling this covered wagon, and Roady Bill riding on the spring-loaded box.
Tony the Pony is a literal pony that was pulling this thing through 4 continents.
And it was Tony the Pony the entire time, 4.5 years. Tony the Pony, little pony.
Is it of a size where a pony could pull it?
Well, it's it's not one of the Conestoga wagons. It's a wagon that's basically big enough for a cot for Roady Bill and presumably some feed for Tony the Pony.
I feel bad for Tony the Pony.
Well, a pony's got to make a living too. I mean, Tony the Pony probably had better oats than half the ponies in the world.
Tony the Pony just sounds like a sex hustler from a 70s movie.
He does.
I can't imagine him as a Bill the Pony type from Middle Earth.
It's Tony the
Hey,
Pony.
Tony the Pony. Finger guns.
And so I saw this ad and I was intrigued, and it turned out that this covered wagon had, after Roady Bill and Tony the Pony had made this grand tour of the world, and you can just picture them clop 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 clop.
Yeah, they're not making good speed.
No, it's a pony, and this is a wood-wheeled covered wagon. And imagining the roads of the world in 1928 it's basically half the travel must have been on essentially the Oregon Trail.
America's roads were in terrible shape,
Yeah.
much less Europe and Africa and wherever else he was going.
Right, and I mean they were in terrible shape because most of them weren't roads yet, right? Macadam hadn't even been put down.
There wouldn't even be gravel for most of America. These would be dirt roads,
mud,
dusty in the summer, muddy in the rain.
And what's even crazier is that he left New York January 15th, so not like the best pony traveling weather. But then I'm sure he was on Roman roads for part of the trip. After this trip...
So this is one continuous trip. He didn't get to San Francisco and then years later decide he was taking a European tour.
I think he probably turned around and either he went through Canada and Mexico on the way, or turned around and went back through those things. I mean, he had to get to Europe somehow and presumably didn't leave via ship from San Francisco.
Yeah, what kind of ship is he getting on?
With his pony.
With a pony.
It's a pony carrier.
Can you, I mean, would there have been some kind of freight ship?
Yeah, must have. I mean, things had to get around the world, even back then. I mean, in 1928, you're into the steel-hulled steamship era.
Yeah.
And they're sure.
But it's not going to be a passenger liner if you're trying to bring your pony.
Well, down in steerage. I mean, I'm sure that there were people at the Kentucky Derby that were importing Arabian horses.
Oh yeah,
you know,
and then I've seen the Black Stallion.
There it is.
Sometimes the ship sinks and the stallion swims to safety.
There it is. The covered wagon then was displayed at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair.
Okay, this was going to be my question. Is there an audience for this, or is he just doing this as because he's an oddball?
So at this point, I was very intrigued by Roady Bill and Tony the Pony, and so I started to try and figure out what was going on here.
Yeah,
and in the course of it, I discovered that Roady Bill, who was a veteran of World War I, was doing a thing that surprisingly was very commonplace, which was, as you surmised, in the family of patent medicine selling. But it was a kind of vocation in the sense that Roady Bill would clop, clop, clop into your little small town.
And you're excited about anybody coming to town.
And you're like, what is this? And he's got a big billboard on the side of his thing, and he pulls up in front of the town square. And
he's been to Canada, he's been to Africa, he's got stories.
Tony the Pony, I'm sure, was a fun pony for kids to pet.
Might wear a hat.
Tony the Pony almost certainly had a straw hat. And the townspeople would all crowd around. Hey, did you hear? There's this guy that went around the world. And they would all come, and Roady Bill would put out his hat or rattle a tin can.
Do you think he's selling anything, or
so
you don't think he has unguents in the back? So
there, the tradition among these, what are a kind of show people, and there it turns out in researching this that this was a big thing. Starting in the mid to late 19th century, and going really all the way up to and through World War II.
It's a kind of carny, basically.
It is, right? And you can think of a horse-drawn cart coming and sharpening your knives or selling pots and pans.
Tinker.
These were people that even in my dad's life in Seattle used to show up at the back door of the house, and they'd be selling some modern convenience, which at the time was, I don't know, a hand-cranked water pail,
Flour mill.
But Dad used to talk about, the traveling salesman that came to the back door and were selling little knives and gizmos.
They had a sample case full of stuff.
But what Roady Bill and Tony the Pony would sell is a postcard that had a picture of their wagon and that said, like, I met Roady Bill, and various other little sort of gimcrack stuff that was definitely directly connected to the idea of buy this and help Roady Bill and Tony the Pony keep on keeping on.
They invented both the merch table and Patreon.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it was, as you say, all these small towns, they were just desperate for any traveler. But then in big towns, this kind of strangely rural character also had appeal in downtown Chicago. Here's Roady Bill and Tony the Pony, like, ha ha. Everybody else is walking around in straw boaters.
And this is the Petticoat Junction kind of entertainment.
Exactly. And so it's less interesting that Roady Bill has been to New York City and more interesting that Roady Bill has been to Podunk, Iowa. And I'm sure people crowd around and go, have you been to my town? Did you go to Fort Wayne?
Here's a country pony with flowers in his straw hat.
Right.
And even in a city that has more horses than the Zero we see today, that's still notable.
So Roady Bill...
He's a folksy character.
Roady Bill is a folksy character and did this, what would be, 65,000 miles around the world.
I like how his only job is going places.
Yeah.
And when he gets there, all he does is he is the guy who goes places.
He's there.
And that's his brand. Hey, guys. And I'm sure you're paying for the stories and stuff, right? Like,
yes.
You're buying a cheap piece of crap inscribed with his name, but what you're really getting is you're going to hang out with him for 20 minutes and hear the spiel.
Yeah, he lowers the tailgate. He sits on it. The van is covered with signatures and signs from all around the world, Cairo and Istanbul.
He tells some lies about the kind of... I mean, do we think it's true? Is there any way that he didn't go to Europe and Africa? That's just part of the pattern?
No, it seems well documented, except in the sense that none of these carnies are actually that well documented. A lot of the record of them really is in the form of postcards that, you find tucked away in a book somewhere and you're like, what the heck is this? Because Roady Bill was not at all the most outrageous of these kinds of travelers. And it's coming from a time when, I think we kind of forget, certainly we living a middle-class life, forget how much of human life is just getting to the next day. If you can find a way to get food today, you've made it to tomorrow.
Yeah.
And, we think in terms of, well, I'm trying to, mortgage or trying to provide for my kids' college education. But, there are billions of people in the world today that are just trying to get to tomorrow. And that was much more true in 1910.
I feel like a big reason for modern dissatisfaction with work is that we've kind of decoupled that kind of subsistence from what we do day to day. People used to be passionate about their jobs because guess what? You were actually picking the crop that was going to be ground into flour and that you would be eating today or next week.
This is it. Right.
And guess what? That's pretty fulfilling. Whereas, when you decouple labor from the physical signs of what you're getting out of it, it's just, I did these 8 things my boss made me do.
Right.
And then I'm going to get a check. It's no wonder that people don't find fulfillment in that anymore.
Yeah, it was Marx's critique, right? As soon as you sit there and just make a wheel that goes onto something bigger and you don't own the wheel, you don't own the thing, you don't sell the thing, you can't even afford the thing.
You don't see the fruits of your labors except in a super indirect way that doesn't let you take any pride in what the labor was.
And when you think now, especially I think if you only get paid every 2 weeks, there's no one thing you do that is connected to what you get paid for.
Now you're basically a science experiment.
Right.
Doing something awful for 10 hours and then you get home too tired to do anything but watch TV.
So a lot of this was based around the fact that, like, here you are, you have a family or you're a person and you have no idea how to make money and you just set off with a sandwich board.
Make your fortune.
Yeah, like I'm walking to Chicago, and you come into a town, and we've been doing this show, this episode already for almost 40 minutes, and I have not mentioned my walk across Europe, so I'd better get to it now.
That must have been hard. I can see one of your
tough.
eyelids twitching.
Yeah, it was tough. But on my own walk, I often would come into small towns, and they would say, "What's your shtick?" And a lot of times in the Balkans, they understood what I was doing in terms of a pilgrimage.
Uh-huh.
You're going to Jerusalem. And I would say, I'm not going to Jerusalem. Well, what do you mean? Why are you not going to Jerusalem? It seems like that would be the only reason you would do this.
Were they insulted?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, why aren't you wearing a big cross and going to Jerusalem? Because those were the only people they'd ever met that would do something this inconceivable or had read about.
There weren't people walking through to provide any kind of entertainment or service.
Right.
When they saw middle class American or Western European people doing it, it was religious.
Yeah, someone with a hair shirt, someone that was wearing a crown of thorns and walking to Jerusalem. Now, I saw on the road quite a few people, usually on bicycles, where their panniers had a bunch of signs on them, like from Beijing to Paris. It was still a thing, even in the year 1999.
And would the economy work the same? You stop in each little village and tell the story of your travels?
No, in general, they were rich Germans or Americans or Belgians, and they had those signs by way of just sort of, because you come into a little village and you have to explain, and rather than explain, they could just point to their pannier.
Justify my existence.
And all done in this sort of around the world in 80 days. They're all trying to find meaning in their own lives, as I was, but they were doing it with technology in the form of like a cool bicycle, and they encountered all the same bad weather that I did. They just were doing it faster and had to worry about their cranks, where I had to worry about a different kind of crank. But the make a living by doing it, and that's not to say put your kids through college, but like make a daily living.
Yeah.
Put people out on the road. And the first few times somebody comes through your village saying, I'm walking to San Francisco, they draw a crowd. But the fourth person who's walking to San Francisco no longer matters much.
There's a walking glut.
There's a glut of walkers. And this glut of walkers was already true by the 1870s. Because in the 1870s, you could conceivably walk to San Francisco from New York City. Now, you were not walking along a road. You were, out on the frontier. But there were, all the people in Oregon got there by walking. And it was only a little bit later that it became a thing you would do as a stunt. But to the people that had gone on the Oregon Trail, the idea of walking to Oregon did not hold any special appeal.
Yeah, literally everyone here already did that.
That's right. Or at least everyone in Salt Lake walked as far as Salt Lake. We didn't keep going to Oregon, but we're here. And so some of the original people doing this had to do it as a stunt. And
do you add something?
You add something.
What are some? You got to have a gimmick.
You do have to have a gimmick. And some of the earliest ones were, I'm going to Oregon pushing a wheelbarrow. So you'd be sitting in your little town out in Nebraska, and here would come a guy, and he would say, I'm pushing a wheelbarrow from New York City to San Francisco. And the wheelbarrow would have whatever, his blanket and his stuff.
That wouldn't impress too many people in Salt Lake. They're all descendants of
people
wheelbarrow pushers. Yeah.
But very quickly, it became not a thing that even pushing a wheelbarrow could get you that much attention.
Gimmick escalation.
So it became a thing where you had to do it in a different way. I'm going to go across America and beat the record for pushing a wheelbarrow across America.
Like a speed record?
Speed record. So there was a guy by the name of L.P. Fettermeyer pushed a wheelbarrow across America in 1879. He was really hustling, but he got to San Francisco and discovered that Lyman Potter had done it the year before. And so Federmeyer found Lyman Potter and said, "I'll race you across America." And they turned around and had a wheelbarrow race from San Francisco back to New York City. This is in 1879. And it was Federmeyer who won the wheelbarrow race.
I bet they were in collusion.
I mean,
you want to, be neck and neck, get into town just a day before the other guy.
Who
alternate?
I mean, across the country,
I think it was fixed.
The thing is, there's no. I mean, what is there? Is there even a telegraph across the United States in 1879? Maybe, probably Pony Express.
Yeah, not till the rail.
Well, the railroad got in there.
Oh yeah, 1879 would have been after Pony Express, right?
Yeah.
So yes.
So people knew you were coming, I guess, and their crowd would form, and it's like, here he comes. we see him from 2 miles away, and he's pushing the wheelbarrow.
1861, by the way, first transcontinental telegraph.
Okay, 1861. So it's now, they are also racing. Probably the newspaper is covering it.
But they should take the same route, I think.
Right.
Right? You don't want to have to explain to every town, hey, you're never going to meet the other guy, but I hope I'm ahead of him.
Right. He's 40 miles away up the road.
He took the 108.
There was then, there was another guy around the same time he decided he was going to push a wheelbarrow around the United States circumference.
Wait.
So
does he have to?
He's following the border.
So on the Canadian-Mexican border, I get it, but does he have to just follow the coast?
Yeah, he did. He went along the beach.
Aren't the tides tricky?
On both coasts, or the third coast down in the south, just like did the entire circumference of the United States pushing a wheelbarrow.
Think of all the inlets.
Right.
Like you just walking up the beach on the Oregon coast today, you can't get a mile before you hit some river. You got to go inland to find a bridge.
So this was part of the reason that I chose to walk from Amsterdam to Istanbul. My original idea was to walk from Vancouver to Tijuana. But then I thought about it and it was like, well, either I'm walking along the shoulder of Highway 1, and I've been up and down that road. There's nothing, you're just walking from motel to motel. Or I'm walking along the tidal flats, which I've walked along the tidal flats. It's kind of lame. And also all along the Oregon coast, when the tide comes in, you can actually get caught in some of those places where when you enter it, there's a nice wide beach. And then 2 hours later, you're underwater and nowhere to go. So I was like, what is a similar distance as Vancouver to Tijuana? And I actually took a little ruler and sort of roughly looked at that and then applied the ruler to different places in the world. And I was like, oh, look at that. It's the same distance across Europe, diagonally.
Do you believe that the Istanbul is the Tijuana of Europe?
Ooh, I'm gonna leave that alone. Amsterdam is the Vancouver and Istanbul is the Tijuana? No, I hadn't thought of that. Very, very quickly, there was an escalation of show people. So, for instance, there started to be people that were going to do this on stilts.
Like those coffee can stilts you make in kindergarten?
Yeah. A man walked from Paris to Moscow on stilts in 58 days, which is 30 miles a day on stilts.
I feel like Napoleon could not have done that on stilts.
I could not have. 30 miles a day is a long way to walk. So
I don't think Napoleon did that off stilts.
Not at all. No. To go 30 miles a day is to wake up at dawn and walk your butt off until dusk. And so this person, whose name was Sylvain Dorman, had to be so good at stilts. You could cover a lot more ground if you had tall stilts. You're like
like one of those giant Uncle Sams.
Yeah, right. You're an Imperial Walker or whatever. You're a what are those? They're not slee stacks. They're the Walkers, right? Wasn't that a science fiction book from the 70s?
Oh, you're talking about the John Christopher books?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Walkers. Is that what they're called?
Yeah. Well, you're the
City of Gold and Lead.
you could totally cruise on stilts if you were good enough at them that you didn't crash.
Tripods,
right.
So you're slower until you're faster.
And you have to be careful you don't get caught in the cobblestones.
Theoretically, if your stilts are tall enough, you could get from Paris to Moscow in seconds.
Well, one step. Right.
You'd probably need a space helmet.
But then there were people that did the trip across the continent rolling a barrel. There were people that did it standing on a medicine ball and rolling.
Oh, wow.
But like rolling with their, like standing on the ball.
What if I'm the first guy ever to cross the continent going beep, 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 beep?
You wouldn't be, because someone has already done everything.
I just think it has to be, you can't just be the first to something. It has to be something inherently good or difficult, like balancing on the medicine ball.
I mean, there was a person who went all the way across Europe or all the way across the United States hopping. There was Harry Bensley walked around the world with a mask on.
I've been to a drugstore 3 times this week with a mask on. I don't care. I think that this is a result. This is yet another result of the age of exploration.
Yes.
Kind of coming to a close.
That's right.
People, these are people who back in the day could have said, I wonder what's on the other side of yon mountain range. I wonder what's on the other side of this ocean.
Well, and we still see it, right? I mean, rich guys hook up a balloon and try and go around the world.
So nobody's been over the North Pole in the winter without refueling in this kind of a glider.
Right, on skis, wearing a tutu.
Yeah.
But the difference is that these people were all,
poverty line.
Yeah, and one of the things, one of the versions of this was doing it with no money. A guy by the name of W.B. Jones went from Dallas, Texas to Nome and returned, and his little sandwich board said, "I'm doing it with no money."
Is that just a way to get donations?
Yeah, right. You show up in a town and you're like, "I'm doing this with no money. Who's got pie?" And people, how do you get to Nome in 1907 on foot? You don't.
Yeah,
you don't. But he figured it out. And
or you can just put it on the sign.
Right, just put it on the sign. A lot of people did it. Part of the shtick was they did it as a family. A guy by the name of Professor J.A. Damrell had a sledge that he figured out how to domesticate enough 5 timber wolves, and the timber wolves supposedly towed him and his wife across the United States in 1912.
I would give that guy pie.
Right?
If you see 5 wolves pulling us, I'd give that guy anything.
I don't know how
I'd make him my heir.
I don't know how you could do anything with 1 wolf, let alone 5 wolves. So then inevitably, this became a thing that was a new form of advertising. So
right.
They would go across the country advertising a brand of shoes. They would go across the country advertising, like I've walked 32,000 miles in my so-and-so shoes. There was, and there was the sort of pilgrimage thing, like I'm going to meet the Pope. And the Pope actually met some people that were doing this stuff.
He didn't want to.
Yeah, no, the Pope was like, oh, God. And then the next thing was it became a thing that disabled people did. So I'm going around the world and I lost both my legs in the war.
Yeah, I feel like this is this is kind of the variant of it that I feel like I have some living memory of. Canadians, love the story of Terry Fox.
Of course.
And there's, I think you see analogs to that. I feel like I've seen it in my lifetime.
Yeah. And to be missing a leg and then walk across America backwards. So there was a carny escalation that started in the 1870s that only really petered out in the 1950s. And what you see, I think, is that there will be a drought of this kind of showman, and then it becomes novel again, especially if you're sitting at the sock hop in 1954 and somebody comes up walking on a medicine ball backwards wearing a mask. I mean, you're talking about flagpole sitting and goldfish gobbling. I mean, one of the people actually that went across America did it holding a goldfish bowl with a goldfish in it.
He's a Dr. Seuss character.
Like, what is happening?
But flagpole sitting and things like that are not cyclical. But you're saying this kind of was?
It was. I mean, unlike flagpole sitting, except that flagpole sitting would prime an audience for the idea of a stunt. Kind of like we're primed for stunts.
Yeah, it's
now,
street magic or...
Yeah, in a different way. Like this was also the era in the 20s and 30s where Will Rogers was flying to the North Pole we had only recently had the first person cross the Atlantic in an airplane by themselves.
Yeah.
So stunts have always been a thing, but this certain kind of just like Roady Bill and Tony the Pony going from sandwich to sandwich. And the fact that it's not documented in any, because the newspapers, the New York Times was not covering Roady Bill and Tony the Pony. And really the St. Louis Post-Dispatch didn't after a certain time.
Small local papers might, but those are not
maybe
digitized or indexed or maybe don't even survive.
When I was in Hof, Germany, the woman who ran the pension in Hof, we hit it off right away, just an instant love relationship. And she didn't speak English and I didn't speak German, but, either of us much. But she just was a vivacious woman. And the next morning...
whoa, way to skip the good part.
Thank you. The next morning, over my eggs and bacon, she brought a man into the room and she said... Das newspaper reporter, and this guy sort of spoke English.
He had a thing in his hat, a little piece of paper that said Der Press.
And he interviewed me, and then I had the following morning, I guess I stayed another day, like an above-the-fold half-page article about me in the Hof newspaper. American boy walks to Istanbul, and, with a photograph and everything.
I'm sure that woman shows that article proudly to your son.
Yeah, well,
every day.
Das ist father. I'm sure that article is hanging in a frame in her pension. It's certainly hanging in a frame in my pension. But so it's still, it can come around. I think if you were sitting in your palatial manse in Finney Ridge and a person rode by on a bicycle that had a sign that said "I started in Cairo."
Sure.
I don't know if you would give that person a sandwich, but you'd certainly give them a second glance.
I don't know if I believe him. Today everybody's such a sharp, like everybody's knows about the hustle.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're, maybe back then you didn't care. You just wanted to embrace the mystery. Sure. He's probably been to foreign climes.
I'm not sure if a person came rolling into your town backwards on a medicine ball with a blindfold on, who was missing a leg and wearing a sign. The idea that there would be a support vehicle that as soon as he left the town, they would put the medicine ball in the trunk and drive to the next town.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or I'm not sure if...
there's a reason a lot of this predates automotive and air travel. Because that takes a lot of the glamour and romance out of ambitious travel.
But I also feel like selling a 5-cent postcard. I mean, you're not getting rich doing this, right? You're really going from sandwich to sandwich.
You're doing it for pie.
So not a thing that there's that much opportunity for fraud. I mean, you're not going to carry a medicine ball. That would be worse than standing on it and peddling.
But we've also lost the kind of society where you start conversations with strangers, Today, I'm just going to wait for them to tell me about their mixtape.
Right.
Which is a shame.
Nobody comes into your town. This person would ride by you in Finney Ridge, and you wouldn't even see them because you'd be playing Pokemon Go.
Yeah, I wouldn't look up from my phone.
So the auction for Roady Bill's and Tony the Pony's covered wagon, which happened on February 5th, 2001.
2001.
I'm sorry, 2021.
Okay.
February 5th, a day not unlike today.
It has much in common with today.
A day that will live in infamy. The covered wagon, so this is the way the auction site works. People are commenting, but they're also bidding on Bring a Trailer. And in the last minutes...
is this happening live as we record?
So while we started to record, the auction was still live. And
I missed my chance.
You did. And at 2:20, there began a bidding war. A bidder by the name of Live Studio, who presumably wanted Roady Bill's. I mean, it's basically like wargamer.net. They wanted the covered wagon to, I don't know, sit in the lobby.
Yeah.
They placed a bid of $14,270. And then Saturn III upped the bid to $15,751. Live Studio countered at $16,000. Saturn III went to $20,000. Live Studio went to $20,250. There were 20 separate bids
between these two.
At which point the seller chimed in and said, "Hey, these like little penny ante bids aren't going to get you there." But they kind of just
like he thought both amounts were too low.
Yeah, they kept batting back and forth.
But isn't that how auctions work?
Well, yeah, but it was it wasn't enough, and it got up to $28,000 before the auction closed, and then it was revealed that there was a reserve.
Oh,
and the seller, who I don't know, based on their comments, a lot of the guys on this website are not very good at using punctuation because they're 70-year-old car guys, and they're like, herp, derp, derp, never saw a period or a comma before. This seller it kind of has an ESL feeling, but they wrote a comment and they said, "Sorry, we can't let it go for under 35,000. We anticipated it reaching 100,000."
I think they might have anticipated incorrectly until we recorded this, maybe.
That's right. Until someone was and I think it was Saturn III who was the high bidder at 28,000. He and Penoak, the seller, arrived at a post-auction agreement to sell it to him for 35,000, and I think that's the end of the auction. The Roady Bill and Tony the Pony wagon is going to a good home with Saturn III.
That's good news. But I wish you had told me this half an hour ago. I would have been bidding during the show.
Well, I know, and we could have had it situated right here in the middle of the bunker. We could have recorded from inside Roady the Bill's. I mean, there's probably some vestige of the scent of Tony the Pony's oats.
Instead, I had to do what I normally do during your shows and do the New York Times spelling bee puzzle. And that concludes Roady Bill and Tony the Pony. Entry 1077.PR0719, certificate number 46962, in the omnibus. If you are looking for places to go on the internet in your area, you can see if any of these still exist. Twitter, we were at Omnibus Project, at Ken Jennings. You could look at Facebook and go to the Future Links page. You could go to Patreon and find John Roderick's web presence. You could support our show at patreon.com/omnibusproject. And that helped keep the show healthy and going in our era. You could, if you, like me, do your email in a browser, that's a place where you could go. You could send us an email at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. If you had to get offline, you could send us physical mail to our postal address, which was the Omnibus Project at P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington, 98155. I have a very tightly taped package that I've been trying to break into here.
Tightly taped. Do you want some kind of switchblade? I have a whole bucket of them.
I believe it. I have a Swiss Army knife. My son made a butterfly knife out of Lego the other day. And then I think tiring of this, bought one online, bought a real butterfly knife online. So now he can actually, you're bringing a Lego knife to a gunfight if you don't have a real one, I think. It appears to be some kind of t-shirt. Well, what's going on here? I guess I didn't have to read this for the first time live on air.
What is that? That's a whole set of cards. Is that a handmade? Okay,
I'm gonna find out. John, Shane here sent you a shirt that some work colleagues made. I think using your Uncle John Christmas song.
Oh, okay, Uncle John.
They made the shirt. Oh, actually, they made the shirt long before they heard your song. It actually depicts Shane's boss. Uh-huh. So you do not look much like the Uncle John character on this shirt, who looks a little bit like a Sasquatch.
That doesn't look anything like.
I mean, you look like a Sasquatch, but in a different way. Ken, please enjoy this assortment of lightly used bin tags. This handy card stock makes great scrap for grocery lists.
Oh, handy card stock.
They are bin tags.
Handy cardstock was my nickname in college.
Handy cardstock is my my side multi-instrumentalist project. Block picker. These are orchard picking bins from some kind of maybe an apple orchard in Lebanon, New Hampshire.
Okay.
Variety wick. What kind of fruit is that?
A variety wick? It's got to be an apple. Don't all the apples have crazy names?
Wixon? Chisel? I'm now fascinated by what kind of bin tags I have received in the mail. Yeah, Wixon is a kind of apple.
Yep, there it is.
Well, now I can... some of these have writing. Oh, no, they don't have writing on both sides. Maybe I should start putting omnibus show notes on these. The shows would be shorter because they're a little bit smaller.
I wonder if that's the thing. I wonder if because we use regular sized notebook paper, that's why our shows are an hour long. And if we used 3x5 cards,
we can use Post-its and get them down to 11 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shane. And I think that's it. I can't think of anything else I have to say.
Did you talk about the Patreon?
I did.
Well, good. Then that work is done. Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.